Hi, my name is Bas and let's get to painting.
So let's paint today this gorgeous mini and see if we can pull off a neat warm stone effect. We'll use a few paints that will be listed in the description as well. Also, we're gonna be using some shades to tint the stone and to give it more realistic look. As you can see, we got here Agrax Earthshade, Seraphim Sepia, Nuln Oil and Athonian Camoshade. Feel free to use any equivalent washes from whatever paint range you like the best. Also, we'll need some dry brushes. As you can see, I've got few different brands here, but the brand itself really doesn't matter. What's important is the size, because we'll be transitioning from the large to small brush. Next, I've got a dampening pot right here, which is basically just a sponge in a small case. If you don't have one, it's super easy to do. All you need is a piece of fine-grained sponge and any small container that can hold a tiny bit of water. And last but not least, my texture palette. As you can see, it's basically just a piece of cardboard with some texture toppers I made out of milliput and superglued down. Alright, let's kick things off with Skavenblight Dinge, and I like to use the back of the brush handle to scoop out a small amount of paint. This method I find much easier on your brushes and keeps you from wasting paint. Next, we'll prepare our dampening pad. To do so, we'll take a small amount of water, usually I using my finger, and pour it onto the sponge. The main idea here is to make the sponge just slightly damp, not soaking wet or swimming in water. Next, we're going to touch our dry brush to the damp pad to introduce just a bit of moisture. As you can see, I like to use the back of my hand to wipe off any extra water. Now for the paint. I usually take a small amount, wick off excess on my texture palette or on my hand, and do a few test wipes to see if the consistency is just right. And after first coat, your model should look something like this. Now I'm switching to a smaller brush for more control and precision. I'll repeat all the previous steps with the brush and dampening pad. Don't forget to wick off the excess moisture. And for our next layer, we're moving up to Stormvermin Fur. Once again, I'm using the back end of the brush to scoop out the paint. From here, it's just a matter of repeating the previous sequence, dampening the brush, wicking off the excess water, loading up the paint, working it into the palette or your hand, and testing it out before moving it to the model. Also, a little hint for your dry brushing. Apply minimal pressure at first. Being gentle with your strokes helps avoid any harsh texture build-up on the miniature. After the second coat, our miniature should look something like this. For the next step, we're going to mix Stormvermin Fur with Thar Brown from scale 75. This is going to introduce a really nice, warm, earthy undertone to our grey, which helps the stone look more natural. Once that mix is ready, we'll repeat the exact same preparation process as before, dampening the brush, wicking off the water, and unloading the excess paint on our palette or hand. But this time around, we need to be much more selective with our strokes. Instead of hitting the whole model, we are aiming specifically for the highest points, focusing strictly on those prominent areas where the overhead light hit the most. So, as you can see, this particular coat will help us to transform the piece. We're creating a natural looking illusion of light and shadow. It leaves deeper recesses nice and dark while pulling the top textures forward. Now your model should look like this. Moving forward to the next color, we're going to use Thar Brown, but instead of going pure just yet, we're mixing in a little bit of our previous color. We're also picking up smaller dry brush for more control. Following all the previous steps, we're still focusing on the upper parts of the model, using light strokes to highlight it even further. Remember, when you're working with lighter tones, less is always more. It's much easier to build up the color slowly than to fix a heavy mistake. So take your time and don't rush the process. As you can see, we highlighted the most exposed areas. Moving on, we are mixing Thar Brown with Mojave White from scale 75. If you don't have Mojave White on hand, you can easily swap it for Screaming Skull from Citadel. I'm also will be switching to even smaller brush, this time for even more precision. At this stage of the video you definitely know the drill. We are going to damp the brush, wipe it down to keep it clean, mix the Thar Brown and Mojave White together, test that mix to ensure it's not too heavy, and finally we can bring brush back to the model. Just remember to hit only the most exposed areas to keep that contrast high. After all these steps, our model should look something like this. If you're already happy with how your model looks, you can leave it like that, but we are going to take things a step further. For that, we're going to take some Agrax Earthshade, large brush, and wash the entire model. We want to be fairly generous here, but be very careful not to overflood the details. If you notice the wash pulling too heavily in the deep recesses, just use clean, damp brush to wick away the excess before it dries. With the wash fully dried, this is how the model should look like. You can absolutely leave it like this if you like, but we are going to push it just a little bit further. Now that Agrax Earthshade has completely dried and darkened down the overall tone, we are going back to our previous mix of Stormvermin Fur and Thar Brown. Following the exact same dry brush routine as before, we're going to carefully reapply the highlights. Make sure to keep your brush strokes light and focusing on the brightest spots and highest surfaces. It might look a bit stark at the first glance, but don't worry too much, we will fix everything up. Here is the result, and let's move on to the next step. To push the contrast even further, we are going back to our mix of Thar Brown and Mojave White, focusing only on the brightest point this time. We are reapplying the highlights on the model. Make sure to keep your brush strokes light to avoid any chalkiness on the model, especially when you are working with bright colors. After this step, our model looks like this. For the next step, we're using pure Mojave White and our finest brush, but without the dampening pad this time. We want the paint fully controlled and perfectly opaque. And we are focusing purely on the absolute smallest peaks of light, bringing out that crisp, high contrast definition. After this step, our model is defined and crisp. but we are going to push everything even further. And to do so, we're going to bring in some Nuln Oil. So mine is a bit old and has gotten quite thick, so I'm adding just a little bit of clean water just to make it run smoothly again. Once it's ready, we are taking a fairly big brush and use this diluted wash to carefully shade all the dark areas, creating a depth and additional definition. The key here is control. We don't want to drown the details or overwhelm the model as whole. We are using Nuln Oil as a filter here, focusing our brush stroke toward the shadows. After shading has completely dried, we are going back to our previous mix of Thar brown and Mojave white. This allows us to re-establish the midtones and enhance the highlights that got slightly dulled down by the wash. Ultimately, I'm not trying to sell you a strict color recipe or scheme here, but rather a universal technique that you can adapt to any project. The correct concept is simple. You use dry brushing to step by step build up your volumes, and then you use a wash as an overall filter to make everything come together. Now that our previous step is completely dry and the colors are tied together, we are ready for one more touch. We will do one more crisp highlight using pure Mojave white. As always, we are focusing exclusively on the brightest points, making those absolute peaks of light truly stand out. And here is a crucial tip for you. Just because it's called a dry brush technique doesn't mean the layers dry instantly. The paint still needs proper time to cure after each coat. Don't rush the process, give it some time to fully dry before moving on. And now our miniature looks like this. And you could totally leave it as it is, but we are going to push things even further. For this step we will be using Seraphim Sepia and Athonian Camoshade. With Seraphim Sepia we'll shade the areas closer to our imaginary sun or light source from above. Then we'll use Athonian Camoshade to tint the lower parts of the model, simulating natural reflection of vegetation. Just like before, control is absolute key. The main point remains the same. We are deliberately focusing our brush movements toward the deepest shadows, ensuring that these washes tint the surfaces without flooding the details. Once all the washes are dry, here is our result. I know you might be getting tired of this by now, but once again we are coming back to Mojave white to re-establish the highlights. And once again we are focusing strictly on the peak points. With the highlights done, and yep, you guess it, we're heading right back to Seraphim Sepia for another filter. As I mentioned before, the whole philosophy here is a cyclical progression, building up volumes with a dry brush, then tinting with washes to blend it all together. Feel free to repeat this loop with as many or as few iterations as it takes to get the exact look you want. To keep balance, we are bringing back Athonian Camoshade for the lower sections, reinforcing those organic ground tones and moss effects. And from here we'll begin a precise highlighting process using a sharp detail brush. We want to reinforce the edges of all chips, cracks and weather parts on the statue using our previous mix of Stormvermin Fur and Thar brown. After this step, you can see the model already has a ton of character, but we are still going to enhance the highlights on the cracks and chips using a mix of Thar brown and Mojave white. Thin down the mix with just a touch of water and use a very light touch to apply the paint. To keep your brush strokes precise, make sure your hand is completely steady, firm and well braced. If you're stuck around with me for those 16 minutes, thank you. I truly appreciate your time. To get us to the finish line, I finished up the rest of the miniature off camera, and without further ado, here's the final result.
And that's it, all said and done. If you find this video useful, give it a like, share, and most important, don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you at the desk.